All right, Entree Architect community, it's 1 p.m. Eastern, which means it's time for the Entree Architect Context and Clarity conversation for Thursday, March 31st, 2022. Thanks for joining me today. I know it's a special time, but we've got a special conversation to have today. So thanks for joining me today. Say hi as you get here. Let me know that you're here and let me know where you're joining the conversation from. If we've never met before, my name's Jeff. I'm in Indianapolis and I come here every weekday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern for one reason, so that we can find clarity around the things that matter most to you, the architect. It doesn't matter if you're the employee of a firm or you own your own firm. Maybe you circled a date on the calendar and you said 2022 is my year. And you're on the runway to starting your own thing. Or maybe you have owned your own firm for a year or 2 years or 28 years, and you're starting to rethink or even reimagine what that firm could or maybe even should be. All of the topics that we cover, one topic every day, they all fall under the broad umbrella of the business of architecture, and they're all the need to know topics for the success of small firm architects just like you. So thanks for joining us today. Again, we're at a special time today. We're 1 p.m. Eastern rather than 4 p.m. Eastern. But I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. It's going to look a little bit different. It's going to be at a different time, but it's going to be a great conversation. Usually I'm joined by my co-host, Catherine McPhail, but Chris, you don't look like Catherine McPhail.
No, I am not Catherine. Thanks for having me on for this conversation, and I hope to do my best in filling in for Catherine. And I hope I bring her same level of wit and humor.
Well, Catherine, that's big shoes to fill. Actually, I don't think her shoes are really
very
that big, but yeah. I gave Chris the crash course on everything that happens here behind the scenes, and he's going to do just fine. Thank you for joining me, Chris. Little trivia: Catherine is in Massachusetts. Chris is also in Massachusetts, so the geography hasn't changed that much for the conversation today.
Yep. Not too far away from each other.
Exactly. Pretty close, actually. I'm looking around the room right now, and I see, first on my screen, I see Isra Banks, also from Massachusetts, North Shore of Boston. Welcome, Isra. Being the first in wins Isra the award that we give away every day for the first into the conversation, which is the John Kinney Memorial Crocheted Bathtub Award. So congratulations, Christian, or congratulations, Isra, on that award. I'm glad that you're with us here today. Jake Flitton has joined us today. He's actually working and not doing the dishes today. That's a great thing. Welcome, Jake. Let's see. John Jones is joining us from Connecticut, right across the street from Starbucks. Yoko is joining us from Alexandria, Virginia. So welcome back, Yoko. Benita, thanks for the wave from Atlanta. Glad you're joining us today as well. Looks like we've got folks joining us today right now from Facebook, from looks like YouTube, and that's about it right now, at least from the commenting point of view. If you're out there, please say hi. Even if you're just playing to listen in or multitask, that's okay. At least say hi. Let us know that you're here and let us know where you're joining the conversation from. It's fun to see where these conversations spread. If you're not familiar with context and clarity, it is not unusual for us to have people joining these conversations from Australia to Anaheim, California, all in real time, all literally wrapping the globe in real time. So it's fun to see where everybody is. Just say hi. If you're commenting right now from wherever it is, and your comment is not showing up on the screen right now, on the right-hand side of the screen as we're viewing it right now, that probably means that you're in Facebook, that you're on Facebook, and you're inside a closed Facebook group. So what you need to do is take a look at the URL that I posted in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen right now. It's chat.restream.io/FB, like Facebook. Take that URL, put it into your browser, and with just a couple of clicks, you can give Facebook permission to communicate with Restream, which is the platform that we use here. And your comments should start showing up on the screen like the ones that you see right now. So chat.restream.io/FB is the URL that will give you that access. Again, if you're in a closed Facebook group, which means there's privacy permissions, which we respect, obviously, and that's the key to letting those two communicate. So chat.restream.io/FB. That should do the trick. All right. So again, if you're just joining us, welcome. You found the Entree Architect Context and Clarity live conversation for Thursday, March 31st. For those of you in business for yourselves, this is the end of the first quarter of 2022, believe it or not. So happy end of March to you.
Time to pay those quarterly taxes.
It's time to pay your taxes. Yeah. Sorry about that. But since we focus on the business of architecture a lot, just saying, you're one quarter into the to the rest of the year. What have you got planned for the next quarter? All right. I see Mark LePage, founder of Entree Architect, joining us today. So signing in live from rainy Waxhaw, North Carolina. We were talking about that before we went live. We had about 70 degrees and high winds yesterday. We're supposed to have snow tonight here in Indianapolis, where I am. So hang on to your hats, everybody. The weather is crazy, I think, everywhere across North America. So, Rod, welcome back from Louisiana. He says, hello. Quesadilla Rod in the house. Glad to have you, Rod. All right. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. I think a lot of you have, whether you know it or not. Over the past month and a half, we have touched on metaverse. We've touched on blockchain, the future of architecture and the internet several times. This is actually going to be our third foray into the topic today. And I think that this is the conversation that you've been looking for. So let me go ahead and introduce our guest for today. Our guest today is an architect, a technologist, and a futurist. I'd say he's a curious thinker and an explorer. He's an associate director at Zaha Hadid Architects and a co-founder and head of computation and design at Zaha Hadid Architects Computation and Design Group, which is ZHACODE. Shajay Bhooshan, welcome to Context and Clarity Live.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for having me. And hello to Alex.
It is great to have you here. As we talked about before we went live, we've talked about this topic a little bit already, but it has primarily come, I would say, from the point of view of metaverse first. And that's a little different perspective than your own. So I think a lot of us are looking forward to this because unless I'm misreading the room, so to speak, I think all of us are coming from it architecture first, from a point of view of architecture first. So I think this will be a familiar point of view to start out the conversation. But as I was doing my research on you, and listening to podcasts and watching interviews and watching recordings of your talks, it really strikes me, both from the ZHA side and your own personal perspective, that you are obviously very interested and very deep in the technology, not just the technology of the metaverse, but technology in general. So maybe a great jumping off point is just what excites you about the metaverse and the technologies that you're using.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most immediate things that struck me and is that at the start of the pandemic was that like the world wasn't expecting that we can easily move online and like survive, and for the most part the infrastructure survived, and so that kind of like started a kind of snowball effect, like where like suddenly a lot of the AR VR technologies that like have been on the fringe, nobody wants to wear these kind of big goggles and like walk around. It was kind of relegated to like very niche groups, but like other technologies began to become familiar, and then we realized that like all the technologies that we were using to design real world architecture or physical world architecture have like so much more compatibility with this kind of metaverse topic, because and more importantly, what was very much foregrounded is that like in the metaverse, everything is about the user's experience of the space. And if they get bored or if they're not find it difficult to navigate, they will just leave, right? Like, and in a way that accentuated, like it like really brings into sharp focus the real use of architecture, even in the physical world, that we need to take care or be aware of like how users navigate through space. Are they finding it easier to find what they want? Are their meetings going well, like because of the space they're in? So all of these aspects are really foregrounded in the metaverse, which are a bit in the background in physical world architecture, because like there are many other things like regulations and gravity and so on. We often forget like the one of the core functions of architecture is not shelter. It is actually helping us lead socially productive lives. And so that's really exciting that it helps architects and us or us as architects to refine our skills in addressing the user, because all architecture is about the user. Yeah.
That's a really good way to put that about using our architectural training. And you said it before we came live, to allow architects to participate in the spatialization of the internet. And I would love you to hear you expand on that, because I think that's a really important concept that people need to grasp.
Yeah, I think that was also definitely one of the key moments of excitement, because in the recent wave of the metaverse, because as most of you may know, in the first wave of the internet, there was actually some effort to make it 3D. Like Netscape and other browsers even had plugins and there were efforts to make 3D websites and so on. And but for various technological and maybe cultural reasons, it didn't really catch on, and the internet defaulted to a kind of 2D experience. But what was curious about that is that as soon as there was an explosion of the internet, like graphic design, UX design, UI design of the 2D interface became exploded, and like that profession like kind of rapidly grew in capacity and also in novelty and innovation. And right now is the second coming or the second way where architects could participate in the making 3D of the internet. And what's beneficial there is that that's our core expertise. Like, how do you host users in a 3D space? How do you display information in a 3D space? That is our core expertise, and that's in a way what we think at Zaha Hadid Architects as the spatialization of internet. Internet being the information world, and how do you organize that information in such a way that people can navigate through that information the same way we navigate through buildings and the built environment as very naturally, right? So that's a very exciting prospect. Let's say we're literally at the early stages, but just a few years down the line, like almost every website could potentially be 3D, and every website potentially is a client for an architect, right? And right now, every website is a client for a graphic designer. Every website is a client for a web development team. But that I think like it's phenomenal new opportunities of the on the one hand. But on the other hand, the spatialization of the internet also relies on a crude knowledge and expertise from the real world architecture and real world cities. And as a profession, like there's no other profession that like knows that more intimately than architecture. And so there's a bidirectional relationship. On the one hand, like it's new areas of business and design opportunities for architects. On the other hand, it's also a place for where we can bring our expertise and make the metaverse better. Um,
I had not even considered that until you just said that. Thinking about the graphic designers that I know, or what I know about that industry and that profession, there are so many now that have either had a resurgence or gotten into the field and created businesses, et cetera, because of that opportunity that you're talking about. And I don't know if we call that Web 2.0 or what, but yeah, that does open my eyes to the opportunity that Web 3.0, I guess if we call it that,
mhm.
could present a similar opportunity for for architects.
Yeah, most certainly. And also, I mean, what was accelerated through the pandemic is architecture is forever changed. It will always be hybrid now. Like there will be some digital representation of already built buildings, one way or the other. Like, I mean, we're already seeing a lot of our clients kind of, of buildings that have been built. They say, like you already have the 3D model. Could you just host this virtual experience for our employees or our users? So it's not the entire building; it's only the reception or the meeting spaces, etc., or the company town hall. These kind of spaces which are social. Um, they want to host them online. So there is already a. It's not really a twin, but like there is a augmentation, like a digital augmentation of the physical world. So rather than meet on Zoom where you have to keep sending a link, why not just meet in the company space, which is persistent, right? Like you don't have to send a link, like you just go to a space like you do in a real world, or in the physical world. And so that's really something that we are seeing um, happening in terms of like spatial opportunities. And some of it is also reverse, like buildings that have not yet been built. You can, users, like they find it much harder to understand 2D images, however photorealistic it is, however human eye perspective it is. Unless you can shift your eyes and see the space, like you don't register 3D spatial effects as much unless you're trained as an architect or a 3D designer. So for end users, like it's very much important that like they need to move their eyes a little bit or move their head a little bit and see and understand the space like that. And so there's an extraordinary use in that sense of to be built architecture, which is experienced virtually in as photorealistic way as possible. So it's kind of like a simulation of the real world before it is built. And so that's also an exciting opportunity where you don't have to make expensive mistakes to build a building and then realize that like it could have been 3 meters wider. So and so that's yeah, we're seeing a lot of that kind of relations as well, like as the virtual as a simulation of like the coming future, such a way that we can correct the expensive mistakes, or mistakes that would be expensive if we made them in the real world. And we're also seeing a lot of pre-sales, right? Like it's a great way to pre-sell a building, like and pre-sell and crowdsource, residents or housing. Let's say you have a homeowners association, like you have a community that wants to live together. Um, like you can experience that, like form communities online first in a spatial way, and then build the buildings. And so there's like all kinds of opportunities in this 3D relationship between online and on-land architecture, let's say.
I'm glad you brought those terms up, because I love that juxtaposition. And we were talking before we went live that a lot of times we've been saying virtual versus real life, but I like the fact that you're looking at it in terms of online and on land. How much? And you gave examples. One of the things I was doing to research to get ready for this conversation was I was watching the conversation you had with Mayor about metaverse and blockchain opportunities, and you gave an example of a um, housing complex, maybe, and how everybody voted and selected spaces, et cetera. How much are you using online versus on land, and the relationship between the two in the day-to-day design work?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, so the idea of like this relationship between online community formation and hosting a community in a 3D website, as opposed to a Discord channel, or as opposed to a Facebook group. You could have that same community in a 3D space, and that 3D space could be their future house. And so that idea is almost like at the turn of the century. Like, it's not an idea that I had. It was from Patrick, Patrick Schumacher is the principal at Zaha Hadid Architects, and he started a course called the Design Research Lab, a co-founded course like around the turn of the century, early 2000. And so at that time, there was a team of young research architects, like, who were recognized the opportunity then, of the 3D internet, and said, we can combine um, online community formation, like something like Facebook, plus a real world instantiation of like modular housing, let's say. So that idea, like, myself and my partner, we picked that up around 2015, and we've been exploring that idea in the context of like new technologies, like video game technologies, new technologies of modular construction, and trying to bring these two things together. So in that sense, it's ongoing work, like working with our graduate students, where we teach at the Design Research Lab. And the real world application of that, like, is a kind of experimental project that we're doing in Honduras, in an island called Roatan, where we are trying to get the eventual buyers of the house, like, to give them a experience of participating in the organization of the building. And so that is a live experiment for us. As that plays out, like, we are also seeing how it can be translated to other kinds of buildings, like office buildings, and not only buildings on an island, but, like, in the urban setting, etc. So far, we haven't really had a commercial project that does that. So that applies any of these discoveries. But, like, I think it's coming. Like, we are in conversation with people across from Thailand to Washington, D.C. They love this idea that, like, housing, for example, is one of the most expensive decisions that anybody can make in their lifetime, and it should be intuitive, and it should be close to what you see. It should be what you get, like, not like, you don't have to look at a plan and, like, kind of go through hoops and loops to get what you paid for. And yes, but like there are many hurdles, like architecture is one of the oldest professions and highly regulated. I mean, some of it for the good, but like a lot of it, like nobody is like bothered to renew the regulations that have been there for centuries. And so, yeah, it's a bit like education. It's a bit like healthcare. Regulation is there for the right reasons, but maybe we can revisit some of them. So that's the exciting opportunity. But um, yeah, we are not yet having a commercial use of that research yet, but we think it's coming. We've been researching it for more than 20 years, and we are at the tip of something that will happen, I think.
I think a lot of what you just said there relates to a question that we had this morning from James Polk, and how will your work change the way that architecture is practiced? And
Yeah.
you just touched upon having the end user participate in the design process through
Mhm.
this virtual metaverse realm. And I think that that's just completely fascinating to me, right? Because usually the end user, unless it's unless you're building for the person that's hired for you, like such as in a single family house, the end
Mhm.
user doesn't really participate in the design process at all.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about there, I think has the ability to change the way that architecture is practiced. So I'd
Y-
love to hear
y-
more about that.
Yeah, most definitely. That's one of the most exciting things that like that we have kind of stumbled upon as a consequence of our interest in these kind of technologies. And that being that there can be a very positive relationship between professionally designed spaces and and our professional expertise, and the democratization of that expertise, um, which is like, if you think about it, the like right now, like architecture firms, all of the research, whether you're a small practice or a very large practice, you do a lot of research like per project, and that's kind of held in between our years, like. And what the metaverse allows, because it's based primarily on gaming technologies, like almost 99% of all of the metaverse is powered by gaming technologies. And what games have, naturally, to the way they're designed, is the user is at the heart of that software. Like if you think about it, AutoCAD or Revit or like any of the tools that we use as architects, they don't have any representation of the user. They have representation of beams and columns and doors and windows, but they don't have a representation of the user. And most importantly, they don't even have a representation of user choice. Whereas games, on the other hand, video games are based entirely on the users and their experience and their choices. So what we are seeing is the opportunity to translate and transfer some of our professional expertise, which we have refined and accrued over time, like, and make them available in game engines, game software. So on the one hand, the next generation of architects or designers are growing up playing games. They get exposed to some of the spatial problems. So there's an educational component to that. And in many ways, architecture practice will be affected, like in the sense that like we can see that like our extent of impact is not restricted to only the buildings that we directly design, are commissioned to design. We can attract new clients by putting out things in the metaverse, right? Like which will address a vast audience. It's similar to putting out your videos on YouTube, which musicians are discovering that direct to consumer is totally possible. Like the current day musicians, like they're are being discovered a lot through YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. uh, Something like that could also happen with architects, that on the one hand we have our serious expert knowledge, like that we have to study for 5 years and go for licensure for another 3 years. And so that will remain, of course, because that's what is valuable about making designs. But some of that can be democratized and made available in game-like formats, and so that could attract new clients. It could attract like new ways to educate your user base and clientele. So yeah, that's that I think these two aspects fundamentally change the way architecture is scaled up. Let's say, like, so it can go from like a handful of clients, like people may contact you from across the world. Like, there's no reason why you being in India like cannot contact an architect in Mexico. So
So
so yeah,
I
I think.
think I think a light bulb just went off in my head, because I focus a lot just in what I do in my quote unquote day job. I focus a lot on this idea of the perceived value of an architect, and that impacts architects in different ways. Obviously, if you're a sole practitioner in Atlanta that's designing single family homes, the perception of your value is probably different than and by the perception, I'm talking about from the point of view of the potential client or the public, I guess. But
Mhm.
if you're Gensler as a for instance, or ZHA, the perception may be different. But the question is always, the thing that we fight against in the profession a lot is, well, why don't people see the true value of hiring an architect? And I think one thing you just talked about, that democratization and getting people involved, showing having and Chris, this goes back to what you mentioned, right? We rarely actually design for or with the end user. So I'm wondering, the light bulb moment might have been if the end user is impacted more during the design process. Does that flip the equation and change that perception of what the value of an architect in the process, in the built environment is? Do you think there's any validity to that that little mind dump I just had?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think in a way like that. I mean, it's a kind of Vitruvian idea, right? That, like, architecture is both needs to be robust and has utility, but also there's a third leg to it, like it has to delight the users. And oftentimes the delight part is cast aside for more practical reasons, or like whatever, as though it is divorced from the value of architecture, like that it is just a good to have. But in a sense, like in my opinion, in our opinion at Zaha Hadid Architects, that is the only real use of architecture, is that it needs to pro- productively engage the user. So the user needs to feel that it's not only some fantasy experience, or sensorially exciting experience, but something that helps their day to day. That the day to day use of that building is better, makes their lives better, right? And so that really is, or should be, the value of hiring an architect, is that we are the kind of host of all these users, right? Like that we have to kind of forecast, like, okay, the users might need this, they're coming through the reception, they might want to uh, find the easy way to go to the reception, to the meeting space, or like, so we are actually always in our heads, like thinking through the sequence of experiences. But like what we charge for is like the square meters of drawings we make. And so there is like a kind of mismatch there, like but whereas if we started charging in a kind of advertising way, like by the number of users your building kind of attracts, number of lives it affects. Like it will fundamentally change our value proposition, and I think that's one of the opportunities of the metaverse. You can count the number of people coming through your building, like, and so you can do a lot of A/B testing. Like you say, I have these two spaces. Like I put one space up today in the internet, and we see like, okay, 30 people walked in and 20 people lost their way. Try another one, and so yeah, like, so that's engaging the user, like, is I think will change. It's definitely a great opportunity to uh, incorporate like one of the often forgotten aspects of architecture, like that it's not like a building. It's not about like details of like how the door meets the wall and like, yes, it is all of that, like, but essentially it's about the users and their experience. So yeah, definitely I think like the metaverse puts that in sharp focus.
I'm loving this more and more. So you mentioned obviously Zaha did architects, and I in the introduction I mentioned ZHACODE. What does this is a question from this morning from Melanie. What do you do over there at ZHACODE?
Yeah, great question. I every day I can't believe like my good fortune to have stumbled upon Patrick like 16 years ago in a way. Um, so like Zaha, when she was alive, like well, today by the way is her death anniversary, um, as it happens. So they took a huge chance on like some like an untested architect from India, like when I was much younger, um, and 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 so the mandate of ZHACODE has changed like as the practice has evolved. Like so 15, 16 years ago, I got the kind of ringside view of like the kind of ambition that Zaha had, like, and Zaha and Patrick together were just about building the company. I mean, when I joined, maybe I was employee 70, and now we're 550, and like so there's like, I mean, already 70 is quite a big number, um, but what I could see was that like rethinking of architecture from first principle, from the and then attracting enough technology partners to deliver these kind of goals of architecture, like as Zaha and Patrick set it out, was like a kind of great journey for me to witness. And code has like kind of evolved alongside. Like, so code stands for computation and design, and so broadly speaking, we are the conduit between the design ambitions of the company, um, uh, and the academic and industrial research side, like the fundamental research that's happening in industry or happening in universities, etc. So we research everything from that is beneficial to delivering the kind of architecture we want to deliver. So that may include like robotic construction. It may include like design technologies or how to draw these complex shapes, not for the sake of just drawing complex shapes, because these complex shapes have high performance benefits. So curvature, like if you think of an eggshell, uh, very thin, very little amount of material, because it is curved, like has extraordinary strength. And so for sustainability reasons, curvature is very beneficial. And so one of our key research mandates is strength through geometry. So we research a lot of geometry related digital tools, how to create these curve shapes, which have high structural performance, which have high spatial novelty, and also allow for users to find their way more naturally. If you think of the Grand Central in New York, or the churches of yesteryears, like, they had these kind of spatial harmony to them, and at the same time they were structurally beneficial. So that's one of our core topics that we research, is the creation of high performance geometry. And performance can be spatial performance, like, or it can be structural performance or sustainability related aspects. And so as it happened, like before the metaverse, like the tools that we gravitated to deliver this kind of research, and do this kind of research, have been from the computer graphics world. Not Rhino, not Revit, but like 3D Max and Maya, predominantly Maya. So, which is used in every movie possible, and it's increasingly used in the metaverse. Like, so, an Unreal Engine, like, which we previously used um, for real world architecture, is now being used for the metaverse. So yeah, so like it just so happened that the tools that we were using is also very aligned with the metaverse. So so in a nutshell, like, that's what code does. Like, it researches the intersection of design goals and requirements and technology, digital technologies.
I think that's pretty fascinating too, because some people, especially those who are not trained in architecture, might just look at the forms and think it's just form making, as in sculpture, but there's really a structural and or performance benefit to it, and
Yeah.
that ties into also the work that you're doing as part of the Block Research Group. I personally just discovered that
Mhm.
website this morning, and became completely fascinated with it. I spent the whole morning. I was supposed to be working on projects, but I spent the whole morning looking at Block Research Group articles and stuff like that. So I would love to hear more about what you're doing at Block Research Group and what that's all about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so first thing, I wear three. Again, my good fortune is that, like, somehow I'm part of three institutions, and they allow me to be part of the other two. So one is the Hadid Architects, where I'm professionally leading the research group, and the other is at the Architectural Association Design Research Lab, where I'm a, a studio tutor, nurturing talent, the new talent, the upcoming generation of architects and designers. And the third bit is the scientific research at the ETH in Zurich, which is the MIT of Europe. Um, and Block Research Group, like, I've had a very positive relation with them since the time I discovered Philippe Block, who is my PhD advisor, but at the same time a mentor and like a close friend. And what's fascinating about Philippe's research is that he rediscovered, like, let's say, um, ancient principles and design tools of doing these masonry architecture, um, and kind of upgraded them through the use of new tools, and made them relevant to 21st century architecture. And one of the key benefits that Philippe has been promoting and researching and enhancing through his group, and is this principle of strength through geometry. So if you think about, like, brick and or any, like, dry assembled stone arches, etc., they have, like, they can carry a lot of weight for, like, very little. um, it's all of this structural performance comes because of the shape, and hardly because it is some kind of high performance carbon concrete, right? Like a and so that's one of the key principles that that Block Research Group has been promoting and researching and enhancing. So we recently did a prototype for a concrete printed bridge, which is basically treating concrete as a artificial stone, and and kind of reducing thereby almost 50% of the concrete needed. Through the use of 3D printing, you can create hollow blocks. So those stones need not be solid; they can be 50%, almost 50% hollow, and that they can be arranged in this kind of arch-like fashion or vault-like fashion, and they can carry a lot of weight for very little actual material performance. And so that's so again, the principle of strength through geometry is one of the key things that the Block Research Group does, and that is augmented and enhanced through a lot of uh, digital or computational tools that help create these kind of shapes, in particular shapes which are like arches and vaults and domes, uh, but much more freer, like not just like simple shapes, but more complex shapes, more freedom to design, but the same principles. So if you look at their website, they created for the 2012 2016 Venice Biennale like this like crazy thin uh, shell, basically, which is like an eggshell but in stone. In some areas, they're only like 5 or 10 centimeters deep, and it carries a lot of weight, and it's also spatially innovative, etc. But one of the consequences of these kind of showcase projects is that now they're developing a floor slab, commercially developing a floor slab, which has 70% less concrete and 90% less steel in a
Wow.
typical floor slab. And if, as most of you would know, like 40% of like the weight of a building is in the floor slab. And so from that 40%, if you remove 90% of steel and 70% of concrete, that's a phenomenal saving of material usage, and can go a long way towards achieving sustainable development goals. So that's a relationship that they are making, and I find fascinating, and that's why I've been involved with the Block Research Group for more than 8 or 9 years now, or actually 2012, yeah, 10 years. That on the one hand, there's beautiful high performance architecture that is showcased, and the other hand, there are practical applications. It's a bit like a relationship between a fashion show and uh, everyday clothes. It's not very obvious at first glance, like why you need the fashion show, but you do need that because it promotes all kinds of innovations and pays for all kinds of innovations so that they can be part of everyday architecture and structures like the floor slab. So we had to do we and like Block Research Group, etc., have to do these kind of highly visible demonstrators that catch the press, and kind of like Trojan horse the regular use, like the floor slab and the columns and so on. So yeah, by and large, that's what the Block Research Group does. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And so you're using the computational and digital tools to design those things. Is there any relationship between that and the quote unquote metaverse in terms of how things are tested and how that research is done, or is that kind of a
Yeah,
separate?
it's very no, actually, it's very related. Like, in fact, it's way more related than current architectural tools. Like, if you think about, uh, like as I said, like in principle, the way all these tools are developed, like through research, and um, they have very close alignment with the way uh, software is that is used to create the metaverse, gaming engines, um, gaming software, video game software, or software that is used to create content for the metaverse, like software like Maya, software like Unreal Engine. They're all fed in through research that comes from the industrial complex of research related to computer graphics. And computer graphics, one part of computer graphics is actually computer geometry. It should actually be called computer geometry, not computer graphics, because that's a misleading word, because computer graphics actually is the creation of 2D graphics using 3D geometry, right? Like, and so its research is on the 3D geometry bit, and that is very aligned with the kind of research Block Research Group is doing and others in that domain are doing, right? And so, including robotic manufacturing, etc., the fundamentally more aligned with computer graphics and computer geometry than drawing making geometry, drawing making tools. And so that's one deep synergy of what we are calling spatial technologies, whereby architecture and all these other disciplines like computer graphics, robotic, uh, have a great chance to realign and recombine, which was a bit lost in the 20th century, because the tool making just took a slightly different turn. But like, yeah, we are seeing that like our thinking, our ways to understand shape visually is very much aligned with like the way these other professions are dealing with the same topic in a slightly more from a different perspective, and more so like uh, it's also for us a platform to democratize our knowledge. So because it's so close to a gaming engine, like a lot of our tools can easily be deployed into a game uh, and made available to for end users to visualize, for example. Like so which is what we are seeing. Like the second opportunity is that there's like deep professional knowledge that is increasingly getting encoded in form of computer code, which can be made available within a game. And so, potentially 2, 3, 5 years in the future, like young kids could easily be using these tools without even knowing it. Like, and so we are already seeing some examples like Minecraft and Fortnite um, exposing kids to these new emerging research, which even professional architects don't have access to, but like kids have access to. So it's like kind of leapfrogging a generation, because the technology is more aligned with the gaming world, and in first principles than, let's say, Revit or AutoCAD is.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and maybe that's a great way to tie this up. We are getting close to the top of the hour, but
Mhm.
um, if for anybody that's either in the audience live now or is watching this at some point in the future, if they want to immerse themselves or just dip their toe into it,
Mhm.
it fascinates me that you've kind of been on the forefront of this for 16 years or so now. Um, if someone wanted to dip their toe into it now for the first time, what do they need to do? What's the best first step for them? There you go. From Melanie, how do you get started?
Um, yeah, I think the best way to get started is, like start looking at the Grasshopper or Rhino forums. Like, I mean, that's a very good community. Um, and like in many ways, it could be an advantage not to have missed the like last 15, 20 years of like kind of slow development, because like now is really the exciting place where lots of things are beginning to fall into place. So in many ways, like, people might not have missed that much. I mean, because it's been a lot of slow progress, but important foundational work has been done. And so, you could start with Unreal Engine like now, and because like Unreal Engine is all like 30 years old, and if 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, unless you were really, really into this space, like, it would have been like painful to learn about Unreal or like Maya or whatever. But now there's so much content out there, like, you could download Maya and, go to a YouTube channel and like just do literally step-by-step basic tutorials, like, and the only thing that is required is not to think about immediate architectural application. Just for the first, let's say, 2 months, like, you just try and learn whatever it is that software is trying to teach you. Like, the tutorials might be about modeling a duck or a human head, or like, but along the way you will learn a lot about how to make it applicable to the architecture that you are doing. And so that was the way I kind of got really hooked into it. Like, was not, and I didn't even think about like, oh, how is this applicable to the architecture? It was just like, this is a fascinating world of creating content, 3D content, and we will find the use, how to translate it to architecture later. And fortunately, maybe like that was indeed true, that 15 years later, now we're seeing that like things, tools like Maya and like computer graphic research is like so much aligned with the metaverse, and equally with high performance geometry that is sustainable, or easier to construct, or have spatial performance in the real world architecture too. So I would say get started with the open mindset. And there's a ton of content on YouTube and on any software website. Like, so I would say, yeah, Rhino or Maya would be places to start. Or Blender. Blender also has a huge community. Yeah.
I like what you said. Getting started with an open mind. I think that's step one, right?
Yeah. No, definitely. I think, yeah, we shackle ourselves way too much. As a profession, we have so much more to offer. And yeah, like, we can offer broader range of things outside of making buildings. And we can engage with, I mean, again, it's a more true spirit of like, the Renaissance architect. Like, I am often reminded of like the time Isaac Newton was like, father of physics or whatever, that his contemporary was Christopher Wren. And Christopher Wren was an architect who designed quite a few important buildings in London. And standing shoulder to shoulder in 16th century Britain. And since then, like, architects have kind of taken a nosedive, in terms of like kind of shooting ourselves in the foot, right? Like, because there isn't like any reason like why we cannot stand shoulder to shoulder with any of these other professions, and um, if not do better, right? And that's, I think that's one of the things that Zaha and Patrick and these new meta opportunities, and working with Philippe Bloch or working with the students at the Design Research Lab are really given me, is that confidence that, like, we can actually drive the conversation, and we don't have to, wait for any of that. And so, to re-engage the Renaissance spirit, let's say, of scientific humanism.
Well, it's, now that you say that, and I want to give a shout out to Mayor Mystery, because you and he had a conversation that's recorded on YouTube a while back that was a fascinating conversation. And so Meyer points out that ArchiDAO, which is a community that he has helped form, is doing tutorials for architects that are getting started in the metaverse. So go check that out. But I also because he asked, I want to throw this up on the screen real quickly as we wrap this
Mm-hmm.
up. He wants to know, would you develop your own metaverse if you had more time and resources?
Well, I mean, like we are, I mean, even in the recent news, like you may find that like what we are trying to do is not develop our own metaverse, more try and promote the value of architects and architecture and urbanism for any metaverse, and and not to relegate somehow architecture as like secondary or like as a good to have, like that's like that, to drive home the point that architecture is fundamentally necessary for the metaverse to be successful. And that's what we are trying to focus on. And on the other hand, like we also want to say that there is a deep relationship between the virtual and the real, and the online architecture and OnLand architecture, and that we can positively impact the physical world by using the kind of network effects that are possible in the metaverse, like using the democratization mechanisms of the metaverse, using the high speed and like evolution of technology on the metaverse, right? Like it's incredible how quickly technology is developing in that space. Like we can make use of all of that energy in the metaverse and Web3 space to really positively impact the physical world. How can we do that? Well, because we can attract like the best talent into the profession. And once you get the bright people into the profession, like problems start solving themselves, right? Like that. Uh, and so that's really one very important aspect, like why we architects should be at the heart of the conversation, is because we should attract like the brightest people into the profession, and this is also an opportunity to do that. So yeah, like we wouldn't necessarily build our own metaverse just because we want to have an architectural metaverse, but we want to focus on making all metaverses architectural.
I think that is a great way to summarize and wrap up this conversation. This has been fascinating. Shajay Bhooshan, thank you very much for joining us on Context and Clarity Live today. Really appreciate your time and all of your experience and your wisdom that you shared here.
Yeah, thanks so
Again, I think
much, Jeff. Thanks for the invite, and great talking to you, Chris, too.
Yeah, thanks, and I can't wait to see where all this goes.
yeah, yeah,
Likewise.
absolutely.
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to the future. And to all of those out there in our live audience, thanks for joining us. I say this every time, but it's true every time, and I mean it every time. I appreciate you for helping us build this context and clarity community, because if it weren't for you, if it weren't for all of you, we would not be having this conversation here today with Shajay. So thank you for being part of the context and clarity community. Thanks for joining us. Next week, we'll be back here at our normal time at 4 p.m. Eastern. Our guest next week, it's a little pivot from technology this week to next week. We'll talk to Michael Port. He is a professional speaking coach. He's an actor. You may have seen him on TV, by the way. He's the author of the book Book Yourself Solid. So next week we'll probably talk about marketing and speaking a little bit more than technology. So join us next week, 4 p.m. Eastern. That'll be April 7th, I believe, is the date of next Thursday. So that's what's coming up next week. Again, thank you to all of you. Thanks, Shajay. Thanks, Chris, for co-hosting with me today. And my wish for all of you, I say this every time, is that you'll take a little bit of time to breathe and relax and find a way to get rejuvenated, because we're going to do this all over again tomorrow. But take care of yourselves, take care of those around you, be well, be safe, and I hope I'll see you all somewhere sometime soon. Thanks, everybody.